CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
Hey everybody, it's me, Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. How's everybody doing today? It is June 24th, 2020, and it is time for podcast episode 52, which I'm calling What Should CX and UX Job Titles Be? There's a lot of confusion about job titles. People are always asking in office hours, what's a product designer? Why is it called a product designer? And so many other questions about titles. So I'm going to be giving you my opinions on what our titles should be. And of course, usually what happens when I start doing that is someone says, oh, great, more new, different job titles. And I say, look, eventually we have to standardize our own freaking industry. If we don't know what we're doing, if we don't know what we're called, if we don't know what each other does by our titles, we kind of look really dumb. Because if someone says, you know what, I'm a product manager, I go, oh, I know what that is. If someone says, I'm a DevOps engineer, I say, I know what that is. If someone says, I am a manual QA tester, I go, I know what that is. If someone says, I'm a product designer, I'm UX UI, I'm an experience designer, we're not totally sure sometimes what that person is doing at their job, and sometimes the job has them doing all kinds of things. It could be front-end development, who knows. So as always, we are live on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and I'm going to be taking questions in both areas. I've got my chat up. So for today, I don't have a guest. I'm going to be talking to you from some notes that I've taken, and then I'm going to be reading you an excerpt from my book where I have some suggestions on this. For those of you unfamiliar, I've got a book called Delta CX. It is very long, so it is not a short weekend read, but should you get locked down again, it is a great choice. So available on Amazon. If Amazon says out of stock, you're looking at the wrong search result. Please look again. And of course, please subscribe on YouTube. Oh, it didn't work. Everybody knows I've been testing my voice activation system. Let me try this again. Please subscribe on YouTube. Oh, sorry, it's supposed to be voice activated. So just a reminder, please subscribe on YouTube. I want to thank all of you. I'm up to over 500 subscribers now. I'm so excited about that. You are all watching hundreds of hours of these videos every month, and I'm just honored and pleased and hope I can keep doing more to bring you the help and opinions and thoughts and suggestions and techniques that are helping you in your job or your job search. You can also find me and about 140 other people right now on the Slack workspace, which is also free. It's at deltacx.link/join Slack. That's open to anybody, and if you're not a jerk, you're welcome to stay. So please join both of those. Please do subscribe. I'm very appreciative of that. And of course, thanks for supporting what I do by subscribing. Let's animate that one out. So Maggie's here, hooray, and she says, hello, I'm excited for this topic. Me too. So let me start with some of the notes that I have, and then I'm going to be jumping over to a piece of my book. So here's where I want to start. Again, we can't keep chasing titles and changing what they mean. In 2011, I was absolutely sure I was a UX UI designer. Now, many of you who know me know I'm not a visual designer. I'm not an artist. I can push around an existing design system. I've used Photoshop since 1994, but I don't see myself as a visual designer or any sort of visual artist. But in 2011, given what UX UI meant, I was absolutely sure that I was a UX UI designer. And I went out and got a custom license plate for my car. And it said UX UI, and people beeped at me and waved at me and were like, yeah. But then that changed, because I thought, well, I'm a UX UI designer. I'm researching, architecting, designing, testing user interfaces using principles of UX and user-centered design. I design interfaces. But then UX UI changed to mean you're really more of a visual designer and you do wireframes. It's a job that may or may not have research. It's a job that may or may not have us testing our designs or our work. It's sometimes very focused on wireframes or the final visual layer or the branding and typography. So I stopped saying that I was UX UI because I'm not a visual designer. Then I started saying, not long after, I was a product designer. If you need a product invented, designed, improved, analyzed, researched, I can do that. I research, architect, design, and test products using principles of UX and UCD. But then that changed. Product design started meaning mostly visual designers who can make wireframes. Are you seeing a trend here yet? It was kind of the new UX UI. And so I figured, oh, well, maybe I'm not a product designer because I don't want people to think I'm mostly UI and visual design. And for another example is in my book, I interview a product manager and I ask her about her experiences working with her UX team, but it turns out at her company, there kind of isn't a UX team. Everyone's a product designer. And she kind of laments how so many people she's working with are great visual designers, but not really good at UX. And sometimes she has to pitch in. So anyway, product design changed, so I stopped saying I was a product designer. Currently, I don't apply for any jobs that say UX, UI, or product design because I assume they're going to want a lot of UI stuff, and that's just not my strength. Then I saw this quote pop up on LinkedIn about a week or so ago, and I want to read it to you because it actually made me angry. And if you know me, you know I don't get angry at a lot of stuff. But it was from Tom Griever's book, Articulating Design Decisions. And someone who isn't Tom posted this quote. I have not read the book, so I am assuming this quote appears in the book and that someone is not crediting Tom with some other quote. But here is what the quote says. The point is this: user experience design is a relatively new thing, and we're all continually adjusting to the changing attitudes and approaches to creating great stuff. It's all design. When it comes to titles, no one really knows what they're talking about. Right or wrong, we're all just making stuff up and calling it UX along the way. It's hard to end quote. It's hard to read that and understand what he was shooting for because it seems like there's some things in there that could potentially hurt our industry or profession. It definitely doesn't sound good for someone supposedly from our profession to say we're all just making up stuff and calling it UX. That does not help the maturity at companies. That does not help us be understood. That does not help us work together or collaborate with other teammates. This, to me, is a potential nail in the coffin to make it sound like that. I agree that titles are a little bit Wild West right now, but I would not say something like, no one knows what they're talking about. We're making stuff up. I believe we are much better than that. All of us, all of you working in UX, those of you who want to get into it in the future, we're not making stuff up. We've got a formalized discipline. It's not relatively new. I'm just now making arrangements to have someone on the podcast who started in UX in 1984. And before that, we had human factors and we had industrial design and we had other things that were UX before we coined the term UX. It's not relatively new, but we give the impression that we are new and don't know what we're doing when we can't get ourselves together, unify, and formalize and standardize. So, let's see. So I say, can we please stop doing this? It makes our industry look immature and confused. If we can't decide who we are or who does what, how can we explain the importance of human centered design? We can't even agree on what our titles mean. And I also remind people that remember that terms like CX and UX, and many of you know that I use the term CX more than I use UX. That's just my personal choice, but sounds like I'll need to do a podcast in the future on why I've chosen that since I get asked a lot. But remember that CX and UX are a very general term like engineering. It really denotes an entire domain, industry, or profession. And within that industry, there's a variety of jobs, both individual specialist jobs, as well as jobs that might want someone T shaped with some subspecialties. And so, to me, it's one of the many reasons why UX designer and product designer are titles that just have to go, because I have no idea what you do. If you are a UX designer, yeah, Srikant Chinuyu's here. Yay! Sorry, it took me a moment to read that. UX isn't really new. He says human factors has been around during the 20th century. Yes, for sure. And of course, before that, we had industrial design, which has been around since someone invented a wheel. So, if you're a UX designer at your job, I don't know what you did. You could be researching, you could be testing, you could be doing information architecture, you could be doing content, you could be doing front end dev because you're UX designer. So to me, I want to see all of our titles change and I want to see them standardized. Other people have their suggestions and I have my suggestions, and you may agree or disagree, and I invite that, and that's fine. But this is where I want to go with it. Mike's here. Hello, Mike. And he says the term UX is fairly new in the last 20 years. Yes, Don Norman coined the term UX in the early 90s, but even though the term is 20-ish years old or so, the what we do and how and why we do it, and some of its basis in psychology or originally some ergonomics, that's not new. So, do you guys, were you here for office hours yesterday? If you weren't, check the podcast for the playlist for office hours. Look up June 23rd, 2020. And we got a question where someone said their company disrespects UX and treats UX like order takers, but created a separate CX department and crowned those people critical thinkers who will come up with product ideas. The UX team will then make the artifacts. This is one of the many reasons why I say UX has a branding problem. It's too often disrespected and misunderstood. It's too often the target of internal hostility. But yet, CX seems to be made of gold. We want to build that up. We want to give that funding. We want more of that. We need more customer experience. So, it's one of the reasons why I believe very strongly that UX has a branding problem and we need to rebrand as CX. Many people already are. This is not the Debbie Levitt show. I'm late to this one. Other people already are. And I want us to drop the term that people associate with a process they either don't understand, don't like, or don't think they need. So now I'm going to flip over to my book and I want to talk about the way that I see these things. So in my book, if you have my book, thank you. You can find this under the subchapter called CX Job Titles, Roles, and Headcount. And I'm going to be reading a little bit, but also commenting a little bit on it. So, and I want the chat room to join in live with some of your thoughts and comments. So the first place I start in the chapter is let's talk about levels. So before I talk about what I want to call roles, let's just agree, if possible, on what we call levels, because that's important too. So I am call anybody who is junior or associate or entry level, I'm calling associate. I think that's a lovely word. I think it's better than junior. We say UX juniors a lot, and I don't think we mean anything disrespectful, but I like the idea of the word associate. And remember that anyone who's at the associate level probably has 0 to maybe 1 or 2 years of experience, and they are going to have a job that's probably uninvolved in any strategy or operational things. They're really just going to be that practitioner or individual contributor. Above that, we tend to have the mid level title, which typically just has nothing associated with it. So currently we've got UX designer, product designer. That's typically mid-level, and so I'm keeping with that it's just going to take off associate and not have senior. So that's your mid-level. Again, this is an individual contributor. This is unlikely to be someone involved in strategy or department operations. And usually your mid-level person, depending upon how fast they're getting promoted or where they work, they typically have 2, 3, 4 years of experience. After that, they might be promoted to senior. So previously we used the level senior. I'm keeping that one. I like it. I understand you might say, Deb, what about junior and senior? I don't know. I kind of like associate and senior. But anyway, so we've got senior. Again, this is still someone who is a practitioner and not involved in any, usually not involved in any department strategy, but they are involved in strategy at the project level. So again, this is probably not someone at the senior level making department or company strategy, but probably fairly strategic at the project level, because typically our seniors have 5, 6, or more years in UX or CX, whatever we're calling it. So that is what makes them senior. Some companies have principal or lead above that. I'm going with lead. It's the word that I personally prefer. You can disagree with me. And the way that I tend to see the lead job is it's very much a senior role, but it tends to have oversight. So they tend to be more 75% practitioner, maybe 25% mentor, work reviewer, non managerial oversight, maybe overseeing a group of projects that have something in common to make sure there isn't any overlap or people trying to design the same thing. And they would also certainly be involved in strategy, but at that project level and not really making any strategy at the department or company level. I also noticed that leads usually are not managers in that they don't have anybody reporting to them. So there's typically another manager who has direct reports, and typically the lead might be a team lead or a group lead of some sort and a mentor, but usually isn't someone's manager, because then you would get the title manager. So let's talk about above lead, we've got manager. Previously, this might be your UX manager job. So the way that I see a manager job is a manager is 0% practitioner. So you should not be doing the grunt work or the worker bee work or the UX research or the wireframes at all. If you are a manager, you should be part strategy, both at the department and project level, part mentor and work reviewer, and part, oh, it's funny, my book has 75%, and I forgot to add that up to 100. Oops, to be fixed in future editions. And part operational, being an operational manager for your direct reports. So whatever your direct reports need, you're there for them operationally, strategically, tactically. That's what a manager does. And so I feel very strongly, and some people disagree, but I believe that managers in CX should have a work history of UX and CX work. Sometimes you get a manager who has more of a background of visual design, graphic design, UI work, and sometimes they really get CX and UX and they're great managers. But unfortunately, sometimes they don't. And sometimes they want everyone to be an artist, and it really shifts what happens in that CX or UX department. So I do believe strongly that if you're going to be a CX or UX manager, you should have a good history of CX or UX management work. Someone told me today they applied for a UX manager job and someone wanted to give them a UI design challenge, a visual design challenge. You don't need that person to do visual design work now. You just want to make sure they can manage whoever's under them. So if I wanted a manager job and it's going to be your CX people and your visual designers underneath, you just need to check on the things that show that I can manage those people. It doesn't mean I have to be able to do every single thing all of them can do. It just means I have to be able to manage them, speak their language, understand their work, support them, mentor them, engage with them, lift them up, things like that. Now, above that manager is usually your director. So very often that director is going to be kind of 50% strategy, more at that department level, and maybe 50% operations for the people reporting to that director. My book says directors and higher have key job tasks relating to defining and implementing strategy, including understanding goals, defining success criteria, measuring results, and evolving the strategy. If there's no director or higher, the manager might do this. Mike says, my last boss came up as a visual designer and eventually was named creative director of design and UX. And if that person is a great boss and understands UX and supported you, then that's fantastic. And you don't have to answer this, but if that boss expected everyone to just do artwork and things that were pretty and things like that, then that's bad. Mike says his UX mantra was do what Amazon does. Oh, I recommend strongly against that. Not because I have anything against Amazon, but for a number of other reasons. Like, yeah, no, that's not a thing. So that's too bad. Um, now, let me talk quickly about things like director of UX or CX, head of. So if you're head of something, I'm calling you director, unless you're VP, which would be above director, and of course chief experience officer at the top. So we need C-level people, and we need our own branch of the organizational tree. We should not be answering to marketing. We should not be answering to engineering. We should not be answering to product. Ultimately, the highest in UX and CX maturity is that we have our own branch of the org right up to a chief experience officer. But here's what I want to say about many of the director and head of jobs that I tend to see, and that is they're very often given to people with very little experience because a job thinks, we're going to give you a super hot title. So lately, in some of my travels around LinkedIn and other things, I have seen head of UX given to someone who is in their second year doing UX work. Now, I understand that this is a startup and it's a small company and they want to make it look good, like this person is the head of UX, but this is something that really ends up working against everybody. There's nothing wrong if you're a startup with having no head of UX and having someone who is a mid-level UX designer or perhaps an associate level UX designer, or again, I'll tell you my other names for these things in a moment. Um, because in order to be a head or director of CX, UX, whatever it is, you have to be highly strategic. You have to understand business operations. There's a lot you have to understand. And when I saw that that head of UX had listed a job for a UI designer with at least 3 years of experience, so that they can improve the conversion rates of their system and break into new markets, my thought was, why would you hire a UI designer for that? So yikes. Now we're getting some comments here. Maggie says second year in their head of UX. I know, Maggie. That's what I said. Um, Anna P, good to see you, Anna. How are you doing? How was your move? Anna says, yes, I have seen that too. Head of UX in 2 years. It makes me question the company organization and their UX maturity level. And remember, if you think that that hot title is good for you, if you negotiate, because I once had someone ask in office hours, should I negotiate for a higher title? And my answer was, not unless you don't deserve that title, because what's going to happen is you are going to someday you're going to work somewhere else, and when they see that you were head of UX or director of UX, they're going to expect you to do that job the way their company places that job. So if head of UX, if you are not highly strategic, if you are not working with numbers and figures and Gantt charts and timelines and head counts and all and tools and standardizing work, mentoring and overseeing work, if you can't do that, who do you think looks bad? The company for giving you that title, or you for showing up with the head of UX title and you can't even do the job, and your resume and portfolio make it look like you can't do the job? So that works against everybody. Stephanie's here. Good to see you. She says, I've seen an offer for lead where they asked for 2 years or more. Good luck, startup. Right. You are not a lead after 2 years. I would say, depending upon where you are in your career and how well you've been doing with UX, you are either at the tail end of associate and hopefully going to be promoted soon, or you are in the mid-level bucket. Maggie says, I also prefer associate over junior. I feel junior doesn't feel inclusive to people with years of experience but are transitioning into UX. Junior sounds childish. Yeah, there's something I just don't like it. It's like accidentally condescending. I do like senior. I think we all like senior. We like the word seniority, but I think junior is accidentally condescending. So I prefer associate. So that is my hierarchy of titles. Again, associate, mid-level, which has no adjective on it, senior, lead, manager, director, VP, chief experience officer in the C-level suite at your company. Now I want to talk about roles. So this is where I am totally changing what stuff is called. And again, there's always going to be someone who goes, oh no, someone else who wants different titles. I once saw a tweet by someone I don't like named Jared Spool, who was like, oh, everything should be product. All of our titles should say product on them. Like product designer, it should also be like product strategist, product this. And I said, well, then you've totally killed CX and UX, and we end up in the product department. And I'm not sure that's the best evolution for us when we've always been crying out for more autonomy, more power, more decision making. Not because we're power hungry, but because we're tired of being stepped on. So I don't agree that we should move in the direction of product. Now, of course, I'm calling all of my titles CX because, again, I'm moving in the direction of CX. I'm not using UX because, as I said earlier, and we'll probably say in a future podcast, UX just has too many branding problems. As soon as people hear UX, artsy fartsy hipsters. I've actually been told that. So let's talk about the roles that I envision in the CX department of tomorrow, and what skills will these people have? First, CX researcher. Now, of course, that in the past, that was your UX researcher. This is someone conducting and interpreting unbiased research of potential and current customers. This is somebody conducting and interpreting usability testing, card sorting, tree testing, whatever research and testing your team's doing. And of course, they're coordinating and executing on other research methods, including field studies and listening labs. So this is an easy one. What was previously called UX researcher. I like the word researcher, so I'm just going with CX researcher. Next, I've got a brand new job that I want to see existing in our teams and departments, and I'm calling it CX Data Scientist or CX Analyst, but not analyst from the perspective of I analyze interfaces and say where they're good or not. This is about data analyst. So CX Data Scientist, CX Data Analyst, and that person would do kind of ongoing collection, interpretation, and reporting on CX data, including app ratings, customer support tickets, and metrics, but also, as many data scientists do now in other jobs, though not necessarily for our team, data scientists will also invent new ways to measure the customer experience and create models of behavior. I think we need that. I think that would be a fantastic addition to what our teams and departments do now. And then, of course, they can also be measuring successes and failures. We've got a comment from Oz. Welcome, Oz. How are you doing? Oz says, can we really get hung up on titles and really need to dig into tasks? A 5-person company might have just one person doing UX with 2 years experience. What would you title that person? Depending upon how they're doing, they'd either be at the end of being an associate CX architect, or they would be a mid-level CX architect, because that's where I'm going next is CX architect. So even if they have one person, I want to see people get the appropriate title for what they're doing and their level. But again, I'm still in the middle here, guys. This is early on. Let me keep going with this, and then keep posting your comments and questions because they're perfect, but I have the answers coming. So what was previously called UX designer, UX architect, or product designer, if it doesn't include visual design, is what I'm calling CX architect. I have the strong opinion that the word designer is working against many of us. Many of us who are either non artists or who prefer to do less art in our jobs, that the word designer in there has served us poorly, because when people see that you are a UX designer, they think, oh, you make things pretty. And I think the word designer has worked against us. So my suggestion is that we shift to architect. Many of us feel like architects. We are, if you think about a building, we are the architects, like the building architects have their blueprints and they're planning how the building is going to work and how people will be able to, the building will be accessible and how people will get from place to place. There's really some great parallels to what we do. We've got Stephanie asking some questions, but let me just finish talking a little bit about CX architect. So to me, the CX architect is the person doing the interaction design, the service design, probably the prototyping, might be sharing in content strategy or collaborating with writers. This is someone who I imagine is naturally T shaped or M shaped. They might have some specialties or a narrower specialist with strong subspecialties. So, this person may or may not might not be doing the research at a larger company, again, where Oz says it's just one person, then you're doing a bunch of things, and I'll tell you later how I would give that person a title. But where it's a larger company and someone else is the CX researcher and you're the architect, you're going to use that research and the information from it. You're going to partner with that researcher, you're going to partner with that data scientist, so that you can incorporate that knowledge and data into your information architecture, interaction design, prototyping, user flows, layouts, steps, paths, menus, and all the things. So you would be involved also in the information architecture. You would possibly be the one collaborating with research on things like customer journey maps, personas, scenarios. So that to me is the CX architect. There's a lot of comments popping up here, so let me pause and see what people are saying. Chinu says, how would the CX data scientist analyst role be different from a quantitative UX researcher role? Great question. So the way that I see it is, typically, a researcher is someone who's going to interface directly with the users, customers, potential customers, archetypal customers in some way. They're going to do that direct qualitative research. So yes, the CX researcher role is qualitative, but can also be quantitative if they want to take a look at some other things that affect what we need to know. But when I researched what data scientists do for other departments, very often for marketing, and especially when I saw how they often know a little bit of code and they are often creating their own models, that they're looking for patterns in data and patterns in behaviors to create models and algorithms around. Again, it doesn't have to be crappy algorithms like LinkedIn or whatever. But again, think about where you work and think about where we could really be working with someone who knows how to deal with and parse data in a big way, someone who is that data scientist or data analyst in some way, whatever their tools are, whether they're learning Excel from Oz or they're using something else. But when I looked at how data scientists are working sometimes with marketing departments, or sometimes R&D, I was like, we need that. We need that. I would love to be creating algorithms, and it plays into my behavior triggers model. I do have an old podcast that you can find called Two New Models: Empathy, Knowledge, Action, and Behavior Triggers. Behavior triggers would be a wonderful opportunity for us to have a data scientist on our side who can help create some of these models and algorithms that I talk about in that podcast, and that would be awesome. So I think I see the data scientist as less as someone who's probably not interfacing with customers and working more with other types of data and user behavior patterns and metrics. But again, this is all open for evolution. I'm not afraid to come out with a second edition of a book that makes this better. Stephanie says, would you put someone who is amazing at digging into Google Analytics in this analyst category? I have an SEO friend who gets asked to do a lot of UX work and information architecture who would fit this profile, but she's afraid to brand herself as UX something. Still, she does an amazing job at understanding what people are doing on websites based on data. I think that's quite possible, Stephanie. She could certainly be a CX data analyst, be looking at Google Analytics, be looking at Mixpanel, be looking at Lean Plum, be looking at other things that, again, are not as qualitative, but are giving us another angle of the picture of what customer behaviors are. Now, of course, that still doesn't answer the questions of some of the hows and whys and whats, and that's where the qualitative fills that in. And that's why when I tell you more later, you'll see why I have the data scientist or analyst working so closely with the researchers. Also, I interviewed a data scientist for my book, and she said in general she prefers, for herself, she prefers to hire other data scientists that have PhDs. So, we may or may not decide that there's somebody on our team who does need to have a certain level of master's or PhD education in order to be able to fulfill that role. But, that I'm not going to tell you what to do with education. That's a whole other story. Chinu is back and says, what are your views on the structure of user researcher roles currently? Should they be mixed methods or should there be specialization in qualitative or quantitative research, respectively? I think that that's going to also depend on the size of your company. I think hypothetically, first of all, I would never tell a CX or UX researcher that they are blocked from working with quantitative data. I would never tell them they're not allowed to run a survey if the survey isn't garbage. I would never tell them they're not allowed to dig into our app reviews or something like that. But I also think that's an opportunity for them to partner with a data scientist if we have one. But again, that's a job that currently we haven't been hiring for. It doesn't exist. So I think for starters, our CX researchers have been doing that, which is fantastic, and can continue doing that. But I imagine the fantasticness that happens when they combine with someone who approaches data from a slightly different angle and can really use their knowledge and techniques and some scripting to look for certain patterns and models. So I hope that helps there. Damien's here. Hi, Damien. And Damien says, totally agree with the term architect. Whenever I've explained my work, I always use the building metaphor. Me too. I always say, imagine that I am the building architect and the visual designer is the interior designer and the construction company are our developers and maybe the structural engineer is also from the developer side or our DevOps side. So I think the building metaphor can be great. And I certainly see myself as an architect. A CX architect. So I think that's a great title for us to transition into. Let me see. Krishna's here. Hello, Krishna. Good to see you. Good to meet you, in a sense. Krishna says, I know a few companies. Is that from Krishna or is that from somebody else? Hold on. I'm reading these back all out of order. I know a few companies. Yeah, that's Krishna. Okay, thanks. It says, I know a few companies positioning customer care as customer experience. Then is it right to have CX in the title? Won't it be confusing? Fantastic point. That's very true. There are some companies who believe that CX is customer experience, but that is your customer support team. Now, I can't say that customer support is not part of the customer experience, but I believe if you care about the customer experience, we have to look at the start of the customer experience as not starting and ending with customer care or customer support. That this is something that goes way, way, way back to the beginning of even deciding what's our strategy, what's our goals, what are we building, and why are we building it. So won't it be confusing to have two different things called CX? There are already two different things called CX. I know sometimes when I look at jobs, say on LinkedIn, CX can either mean UX or it can mean a customer support rep, a call center rep. I can't fix that right now. I don't have a great solution for that. I know we need a customer care team. I don't believe they belong under us. But to me, they might, I would probably put them somewhere else in the organization, but I haven't totally figured out where. I've also sometimes seen those departments not called customer experience, but called customer success. Again, that's confusing because there's so many things that make or break customer success and they go beyond customer support. So I'm going to try to stay out of what other departments are doing or calling themselves because I don't want to be arrogant and say, here's what I want to happen in my swim lane, and here's what I want everybody else to do in theirs. I don't want to end up accidentally arrogant, but I will certainly agree with you that we do have a little bit of an issue that CX is a term being used by some but not all companies to mean their customer support team. So, good point there. I've still got more to read, guys, but we've got so many comments coming up. We might run late today. Maggie says, I agree that the word designer has worked against me, especially in a small city where UX is very misunderstood and grouped with UI. I'm tired of doing UI work when it's not why I got into UX. I'm very interested in how we go from here in terms of searching for jobs. Not a lot of UX architect jobs out there. No, and I think it's going to be a process for us to shift some of these terms. It's going to take all of us to do a lot of different things to shift those terms. But let me talk about some other titles that I have created. I want to talk about how I build teams, and I'll keep taking more questions. So instead of visual designer, graphic designer, communication designer, infographic designer, UX, UI, product designer, UI designer, user interface designer, if you are focused on the aesthetics of elements, such as typography, branding, color, iconography, infographics, and other visual elements, you are a CX visual designer. Yes, I want CX in front of you. You are part of our department. You are part of our team. And if you're good at this, you care about accessibility. You care about usability. These are partially the responsibility of the visual designer. A visual designer can do something that improves usability or accessibility, and a visual designer can kill usability and accessibility. So I want you to know what the heck you're doing about these things. I am tired of seeing UI portfolios where people don't know anything about color blindness or the first thing about accessibility. So this is the way that I see this job being. If you are a specialized artist, visual designer, brand steward, you're going to create and maintain the style guide or the component library. You are the CX visual designer. And to me, the only time we call someone a designer is when they have the artistic side and they are focused on those things so that we can stop confusing what a lot of us are doing in non-artistic roles with something that is artistic. Because let's face it, when someone says they're a designer, you start imagining art, whether that's interior design or landscape design. You start imagining things that are artistic. And I think for many of us, especially me as a non-artist, I want to get away from this. Jason says, what have we become? I don't know, but I'm hoping we can become something better. And for starters, I think we need to standardize what our titles and jobs even mean or do. I mean, gosh, we look so ridiculous when we can't even figure out what our titles are. Gosh, no wonder people don't respect us. They should, but I can imagine. I have enough empathy to look at someone's industry and go, they can't figure out what their titles are. They can't figure out what each other does. What's with this industry? My last of my 6 roles in a CX department, again, not considering levels, is CX writer. And so that's going to be what's currently a UX writer or a copywriter. Sometimes they end up in the marketing department, sometimes they end up in the UX team, but I want that person who is writing copy, who is a content strategist. I want that person to be CX writer. Because again, like visual design, writing can make or break usability sometimes. Sometimes writing makes or breaks accessibility, but mostly it can definitely improve or poop on some of our usability. So I want to make sure that this is someone who understands these things and They don't have to have gone to any specific class or education. I just want a great writer who understands that for some types of websites or products or systems, we need lots of words. And for some types of websites, systems, buttons, flows, we need the least words possible that get the message across. I want someone who believes that we create intuitive products that don't need endless tooltips and education. So I want the CX writer. So again, the roles in my dream CX department are researcher, data scientist, architect, visual designer, and writer, and pretty much everybody fits into those. Um, I mentioned in my book that I do not mean customer experience. I don't, when I see customer experience, I sometimes see that as a call center job or a sales job. I'm not talking about call center and sales job. I'm not talking about marketing jobs. And also, I believe that front end development is an engineering job. If you are writing code as most or all of your job, you belong in the engineering department. Now, if you, I've seen a lot of like UX front end developer or UX engineer, which is usually front end developer. Yes, these are people who are our collaborators. We've got to collaborate with everybody in engineering. I love working with the front end devs, the back end devs, the QA people, the DevOps engineers. We've got to collaborate with all these people. We have to stop being on an island or in a silo. But that doesn't mean that these people are in our department. Stephanie says, where would you put the person in charge of animations, transitions, interactions, and things that move? Because this can also make or break an experience. Great question. I believe that for things that are micro interactions or micro moments, that these are probably going to end up a collaboration between the architect and the visual designer, only because both might have great ideas. And I don't want to say it's the architect and the visual designer just does what the architect says. And I also don't want to say it's the visual designers and the architect has no say. I believe both of these people should work together on some of those animations, transitions, and micro interactions. One might have a stronger opinion than the other. One might have some past experience that helps guide. They both might have ideas that are worth trying and testing. So I believe that's an opportunity for collaboration where I wouldn't say, oh, that's this one job owns that. I can see both the architect putting into wireframes or prototypes that this is a suggested transition or animation or motion, and then I can also see the visual designer. Maybe the CX architect left that out, and the visual designer comes in and says, "Here's how these things might animate or move." So I think it could be either or a collaboration. Thank you. Good question. Um, Okay, so now I want to talk about teams inside of companies. And here's the way that I see a team. And when I say a team, I mean, let's say we have a project. Who are we going to put on that project? To me, that is the project team from the CX side. I'm not talking about engineers or the agile team or whatever. I got plenty to say about agile. You can go watch that podcast. But I'm talking more about who from the CX department gets put on a project and how. So, Chinu says, I've noticed some companies have titles like design technologist. What are your thoughts on this title? It really depends what that title means because I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means? I could imagine design technologist being a front end developer. I could imagine it being a CX architect. And I could imagine it being a completely strategic role, maybe at that more managerial or director level. I've got in my design, is it design thinking? I think it's my design thinking podcast. I found a job description for design strategist, and ultimately it was just design thinking. Um, by the way, there shouldn't be any titles that say design thinking. You are not the head of design thinking, and let's not say design doing. Let's just get away from all that. To me, the problem with design technologist is it's ambiguous. A design meaning artistic or CX, technologist meaning strategic, architectural, uh, coding. So my thought on that title is it has ambiguities, and my goal with this is to get rid of the ambiguities. If you and I can't read a title and know exactly what that person probably does at their job, This title has to go. We can't have these vague, wacky, or evolving titles anymore. They are making us look like we are just the Wild West, or UX must have been created last week by somebody who hasn't written it all down yet. So when we've got a project, here's who I want put on that project. And I call this the team, the project team. So my book says the Delta CX model for CX roles places non-managerial, non-leadership workers on 3 types of internal CX teams, which can then be assigned to projects. So these are teams that are internal to our CX department, and then these teams get assigned to projects as teams. And Maggie is she's still on it. Oh, I can't be head of design thinking with 2 years of experience. Honestly, I bet you could. I've actually seen that. So here's the way. So not before I talk about who we assign to the project, here's how I create teams. So in our CX department, we are going to take people and put them into teams within our department. The first team I want us to create is the architect team. The architect team is made up of 2 CX architects. So let's say the CX architects are me and Stephanie. Stephanie and I are now a team. We get assigned to projects together. Now, this could be 2 seniors, this could be senior and a junior, this could be whatever makes sense for what's going on at your company. Some of your teams could be 2 seniors, some of them could be 2 mid-levels. I don't have a horse in the race on how you pair up people by level. I'm sure you'll try out some different things, and I especially love the senior and associate pairing so that there's some good mentoring and learning there, but that won't be right for every project. So here's why. The reason why Stephanie and I are now the architect team and we get assigned to projects together is because very often those of us being assigned to projects at our job are overworked. We don't have enough time to juggle all of the things we should be doing. We're invited to a lot of meetings that we probably should be going to because when we miss the meetings, they make decisions without us. And yet, when do we have time to do our work? So my suggestion is that you, just like they've got pair programming in engineering, that we always pair up 2 architects because not only can they split which meetings they go to, balance each other with work, they always have each other to bounce ideas and other things off of, but then you always have at least one person with 100% knowledge of these projects that this team has been assigned to, whether they're assigned and embedded into one or maybe they're shared across 2 or more projects. There are times at Macy's where I was on one project, there are times where I was on multiple projects, but if I'm the only UX resource on the project and I get hit by a car, I quit, I get fired, someone goes on maternity or paternity leave, someone gets coronavirus, so often that knowledge walks out the door and there isn't always a good transition of that project or that knowledge. If you have 2 people, it's less likely that both of them are out at the same time, though this does sometimes happen with larger layoffs, but of course, hopefully we're keeping some documentation. So the idea is that the architect team is collaborative with each other, collaborative with other people from the CX department, and of course, collaborative with the project teams that they're on for their project. So this also saves us from a terrible fate that I learned about when I was writing my book and I interviewed a Scrum coach. And he said, oh yeah, people on the Scrum team should know enough UX so that if UX wants to go on vacation, the engineers will do their work. And I said, well, either I'm never going on vacation again, or I need someone else to be there when I'm not so that there's never an excuse for someone on a Scrum or Agile team to say, well, Deb's not here and we need this UX to be done, so we'll just do it ourselves. Do not want. So this is my suggestion that, and I know a lot of people thinking, Deb, UX and CX departments are already so understaffed. How are we going to convince companies to hire twice the people? It's going to be a process. I can't tell you it's going to happen tomorrow. I'm only telling you that this is the direction I believe we should go. We should have paired architects so that all of these meetings and work can be better balanced out between two people, and so that there is always someone who knows 100% of this stuff, so that if one person gets fired, quits, becomes ill, has to take some time off, whatever the case may be, we have someone else with 100% knowledge of the project who can bring someone else up to speed and have a new partner. Now let's talk about the research team. The research team is a researcher partnered with a data analyst or scientist. And this is our powerhouse, super action hero monster team of research, testing, metrics, feedback, analysis, quant, everything. These two people are going to work together to know all the things about all the things, or at least to bring up, when we do not know all the things, about the important things. So they are a shared team. Now, of course, they have slightly different roles, so they can't necessarily replace each other. But they are a team who can be working together, and they are going to be partnering with the architects and partnering with other people. So, for example, if we've got a research team that is, I'm just going to pick some names in the chat today. Chinu and Maggie are our research team. Stephanie and I are an architect team. And let's say we are we are we are connected. And so when Stephanie and I get assigned to a project, we know Chinu and Maggie are going to be there for us for all of the research that we need. Now, of course, this is going to be at bigger companies where you are going to have more of these job distinctions. At Macy's, I was UX architect, and I did not do research, and I did not do testing. There have been other jobs where I'm doing a whole ARCA stuff, and I'll talk about that later, even though we'll run late. But at a larger company where we can start to break out more of these specializations, I want to see Chinu and Maggie working together as our researcher data analyst team, and Stephanie and I will be that shared architect team. So again, they're going to be working on determining KPIs and monitoring feedback and determining, this is so important, UX, how many of you have a portfolio where you actually have metrics on how the project went when it was done? I find almost none of us do. And I want our researchers and data analysts to start helping us by making sure that work with us to identify metrics and things that we can be checking on, success criteria, KPIs or OKRs. And then the researcher and the data analyst will understand how we're going to track those things, get those baselines, and be following those, and be able to say to me later, Deb, and Stephanie, your project was a success, or your project's not looking so good, or your project totally failed. So we need to have this information, and right now we don't. We need it internally, not just for our portfolios, we need it internally. So we can then go to marketing, go to executives, and go, look what we were able to accomplish. We have this good qual and quant data on it. So we've got our architect team. We've got our research team. So architect team, two people doing the same thing, though they could be different levels of seniority. Research team, two people doing slightly different things, so they might find some overlaps. And now I've got the third team, and I call them the satellite team. And Maggie says, oh, this is hard when you're a team of one. Yes, we've all been team of one, and it can be a great place for a company to start, but hopefully if they can learn that CX and UX work for them, they'll hire more people. I want to talk about the satellite team. To me, the satellite team are orbiting all of the other teams because they are utility players, and they will work with the other teams as they are needed. For example, not every project ends up needing a writer, or not every project needs a writer full time. Sometimes the writer comes in for the copy you need and goes back out, or works with you for a few weeks on a whole lot of stuff, or like Chinu can tell you, trying to create a chatbot language. And then the writer might slip away, and that's somebody who you can call on later. They are part of the satellite team. They are not necessarily dedicated to a particular project or particular teams. They are all of these other roles that are being the awesome action hero utility players that we need to fill in the rest of the competencies. Sarah says, how would we avoid a situation where there are two CX architects assigned to a product team, but their skill set, knowledge, experience are different enough to where they can't cover each other in the event one's work is, in the event one is out? I would love to hear an example of that. Is it because there are different levels and maybe you're worried the junior can't cover for the senior? And again, not junior, associate. Is it that the associate can't cover for the senior? Or what are you thinking that one knows that the other doesn't? Tell me more. Damien says KPIs and other success metrics would be great to have for our portfolios, but I found that too often they aren't generated until after I've left the project as a freelancer. Yeah, after I've left the project, if a freelancer and the companies refuse to give that information out once you've left. That's true. Sometimes you can't get these things even if they are collecting them, and that's too bad. And of course, if I look at someone's portfolio and they don't have metrics, I totally get it. I don't think I have any in my portfolio, but let's start to try to collect these things where at least where people who aren't freelancers and are sticking around might be able to get these. Again, both for internal business reasons as well as our portfolios. So satellite team is going to be writing, visual design, and other utility players. Now you might say, hey, wait a minute, Deb, don't you think a visual designer needs to be assigned to a project? Depends how you're doing the visual design. If many of us are working with component libraries, style guides, and branding guides, even a full design system, how much do you need that visual designer to join that project and work on the visual design if the components are already defined? That might be someone who you just need, like the satellite, like the writer. Hey, visual designer, come in, work on some of this stuff with us, and move on. So if there is that design system, that component library, and if you're doing it that way, then I can see that person being more of a satellite team and utility player who's helping out multiple teams on multiple projects, especially, of course, where we're all supposed to be using the same design system or component library. So that person can be there to check that everything's been used correctly and the spacing is right and things like that. So I want that. I see the visual designer again in a company with more maturity where, in the old days it was very waterfall. The UX person did these wireframes and sketches, the visual designer came in and designed every screen, and your visual designer needed days or weeks to design every screen. And I think that as UX tries to be more agile and more lean, and as we find things we like about component libraries, style guides, and even design systems, we're going to realize that the visual designer is not it's not a waterfall process where the UX work is done and then a visual designer comes in and has to lay out the screen. We have these components and we can fit them in, and the visual designer should be overseeing that to uphold standards, but is not somebody that I believe that we need full-time on a project the way some people have done in the past. I think we can better utilize those people and help them be more of a kind of that steward and overseeing person to one or more projects. Stephanie says, I feel you, Maggie. I keep hoping my client gets budget to hire a second designer, so at the moment, my business analyst is my research partner. And Maggie says, nice. Unfortunately, the BAs I've worked with are more focused on project and stakeholder management tasks. Maggie, that's more typical. I think Stephanie has probably turned someone into something more researchy than they normally are. So again, this is how I want to create this universe in the future. Now, what about UX team of one? And what about very small companies? My suggestion for that, because in general, I don't like hybridizing. I don't want to go from UX UI or product design to CX architect and visual designer. My thought is there are still good reasons to separate these jobs. You are busy enough without trying to be all of these things. You burn out enough without doing multiple jobs. So in general, I am not for hybridizing jobs. I am not for combining jobs. I am not for making people burn out faster. However, I know that at smaller companies or sometimes in a real pinch, someone is doing more than one job. In my book, I have a whole set of rules of when I'm going to allow you to do that and when I'm not. And I don't have time. I'm already over time. But I just want to say quickly that if you are doing that and it is in a pinch, um, I want to make sure that you get all of the titles of what you're doing. So, for example, if you are doing more than one role on a project because it's a very small company or you've had to help out in a pinch or whatever's going on, because again, in general, I do not want hybridization and combined roles. I don't want unicorns. I don't want jack of all trades. I only want people who are freaking excellent and amazing at things, doing things, or people learning to be excellent at those things, doing things. Um, you should have both titles. If you are doing the research and you are doing the architecture work, I want you to be called both. Don't just call someone CX architect and have them do research and other stuff. I want you to get respect and recognition by having the title that fits what you're doing. So at these smaller companies, I know you can't add 6 titles together, but let's at least give you 2 and say you are the senior CX architect and researcher. I know that's long, but I think it's important. I mean, we've all seen longer titles, and we've all seen stupider titles like Chief Happiness Officer. I think it's important for us to have the titles that fits what we're doing for our resumes and portfolios, but also to try to get more understanding and respect at our jobs. This person is the researcher, their title says research. This person is the architect, their title says architect. That way we are not guessing at what someone does, and architect doesn't mean researcher, and researcher doesn't mean architect. If you really are doing both at your company, because it is a small company and you're a UX team of one, I want you to be senior CX architect and researcher. Could you be senior CX architect or researcher and visual designer? That makes me want to start drinking, but I guess you could be. Sarah says, clarification. Yes, maybe the situation would be where there's an associate and senior paired together. Maybe this would be more of a cross mentorship, partnership, dual assignment. So I think that if I were to be paired with an associate, um, I would be doing everything I can to make sure that associate knows everything that's going on and is equally involved in things. Remember, they are not our grunt workers just because we might be senior to them. That this is an equal partnership. So whether I'm being partnered with someone at my level or above my level or below my level, this is an equal partnership. So just because someone is a junior doesn't mean that they can't be an equal partner or associate, can't be an equal partner, and can't have 100% knowledge of what the heck is going on in this project. Because remember, if I'm going to take a few days off, I think the junior associate can cover for me. If I'm going to be out for weeks because of a vacation, sabbatical, new puppy leave, does anyone do that? Puppy leave, disease, something else, parent in trouble. I don't expect that junior to do my job, for that associate to do my job for a very long time, but I expect them to know enough about the project to get someone else up to speed so that there's no lost time. Because right now we experience a lot of lost time when someone at our company walks out the door temporarily or permanently. Well, I started at Macy's because someone had a baby 3 weeks earlier than she expected to. And because she already had the baby, she called up the boss and said, "The baby's here. I'm not coming into work until 6 months from now." And she didn't transition her work to me. Her laptop was locked in the drawer. She had a cold cup of coffee on the desk. I love her. She was great at what she did, but even she was unprepared for the situation we all ended up in. Nobody knew where her projects were. Nobody knew where she stored her files. Nobody knew where we were in the process. So that's why I think that pairing can really work. Even if you are pairing an associate with a senior, that person doesn't have to do my job for weeks or months. Maybe a few days if I take some time off, and I think they could do it. I trust these people. They're great. We hired them. They're great. They're just more junior. Um, but if I'm going to be out a longer time, I would expect to be temporarily or permanently replaced, and I would expect that associate to be able to get someone up to speed. Um, Stephanie says UX teams of one also happen in big companies that are super siloed. Sometimes one team gets the budget for a designer. There might be another team with another one somewhere else in the building. Yeah, we've got to coordinate and have ultimately a CX department where all of these people have their managers, who is hopefully a CX manager, so that you're not answering to someone who doesn't even understand what you do. So this does require some more operational restructuring and operational changes. And again, that's for high level people to figure out. It's not necessarily for our associate or our senior. Jason Antonik, great to see you here, Jason. How's your new business going? Says the wrong people are defining what a UX architect is. We need to define it for them and be clear and with clear job codes and align it to SBA and other government database codes which are outdated. Right. So even though now, Jason, I have a very hard time filling out anything related to government or insurance or whatever because how do you classify my business? I usually still end up classifying my Delta CX agency as web design because what I do doesn't exist. It's going great, great. I recently got my registered trademark on Delta CX. I had to file it in a bunch of weird categories because there are no UX and CX categories. Luckily, I got a good USPTO lawyer who, not that I hired, the person who reviewed my filing, who helped me file for with the best classes. So that's why I am saying we need to define what this is. This is how I've chosen to define it. If someone can improve upon this, that's great. But I believe the CX architect is our information architect, interaction designer, prototyper. Whether if you want to prototype with code, you can, but prototyping rapidly with software like Principal, Axure, Framer is going to be a good choice. And that to me is the UX architect, and they are working from the research that the research team is doing, or again, at a much smaller company, they might also be the researcher. So we need to define what these things are. We need to say what they are called, and that way, when I meet Jason at a conference and he goes, "Hi, I'm a UX architect," or "Hi, I'm a CX architect," I know exactly what he does. I know exactly what he specializes in. So there. Ex Libris, hello, are you Diane von Ginsbergen? Says, what about the term interaction designer? I see some people using it to refer to UX work and others referring it to visual stuff. Great, great, great point. So I do see people saying I'm an interaction designer. I do see jobs that say interaction designer or UX interaction designer. And you're right, it has also gotten a little bit foggy because interaction designer used to quite clearly be the person who created the wireframes, the layouts, the menus, the steps, the paths. Now, in some cases, there are visual designers who say, I'm a UX designer. I'm an interaction designer. I recently saw some interaction designer jobs that were highly visual design. So I am not using the term interaction designer because I believe it's another one of those that have gotten kind of bastardized and confused along the way. Put it this way, if you are in the chat asking me about a title, or if you've ever come to an office hours and asked me about a title, that's a problematic title. So all the people who've come to office hours and said, what about product designer? Problematic title. Interaction designer? I know I'm an interaction designer, but I'm also other things. And that's why I love CX Architect, because I am into information architecture. I am into prototyping. And I believe CX Architect better conveys that than Deb's an interaction designer, because then it sounds like Deb draws boxes on a page and we just need her to draw some boxes on a page. Just wireframe that person's idea and then you can go away, please. Jason says the trick is that CX transcends the digital channel. Exactly. Jason, in this podcast, I didn't go into the many reasons why I prefer the CX term over the UX term. I went into it a little bit and just talked about UX's branding problem and how it will serve us in the long run to shift away from the word UX. But certainly another reason, and I cover this in my book, is that CX transcends the digital channel, that most people believe that UX just means digital interfaces, websites, apps, systems, smartwatches, Tesla screens, thermostats. But they imagine CX, customer experience, as all of the touch points of a brand with our potential and real customers. Your stores, your experiences, your services, all that stuff. And I know many of us want to work on that stuff. And when I worked at Macy's and I was on the UX team, we had nothing to do with the people who made decisions about things that happened in stores. And that drove us crazy because we wanted to influence what happened in stores, and we sometimes wanted to connect a digital experience to the in-store experience, but we weren't allowed to play in that domain. So I want to see our domains broadened. Jason says to me, an interaction designer is one who works on a model or prototype as a specific job function. Yeah, once in a while I see a job description and the title is UX prototyper. And they either expect you to be like a super action junkie, or very often they expect you to be a front end dev who's going to make mock-ups and models and prototypes from code. So I think that, but again, once you're coding, I tend to feel like you're in the engineering universe. But again, it's Jason's definition of an interaction designer is different than my definition of an interaction designer, which might be different from Ex Libris's definition of an interaction designer, which means this is a problematic title that we need to change or get rid of. So that's why I am trying to standardize titles in a way that is more explanatory, that is better defined, that helps our job roles be more meaningful, that when you see a job listed for CX architect, you know what it is. How many of you are looking at jobs and you have to read every bullet point and every line so that they don't put something sneaky in that you can't do? How many times am I reading senior UX consultant jobs on LinkedIn, and somewhere in there, there's must be very focused on typography? Please no. So I've gone really late this time, and I think I covered most of what I wanted to cover, and I think I got to all of your comments and questions. Thank you so much for all of your great comments and questions. Let me see what else was in my notes. Um, oh yeah, so my last thing in my notes was going to be, now what do we do? What do we do? I want us to start talking to our managers about changing our job titles. I want to talk to your manager, and especially if your manager is in UX or CX, talk to them about getting into titles that are specific and meaningful, because too many of us have titles that are not specific, they're not meaningful. I don't know what you do. You don't know what I do. We read a job description, we don't know what it does. People write job descriptions, they can't tell what we do. If we can formalize and standardize this under my system or somebody's system, now we look more mature instantly. We look more standardized, formalized, and mature. Couple more comments. Maggie says sometimes in job descriptions you see pixel perfect UI. When I see that, I do not apply. Monique, hello Monique, says, thanks for the talk, Debbie, super helpful. Thanks for joining. Jason says, yep. Sarah Lynch says, fantastic answers and discussion, Debbie. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for joining. I'm so happy to see lots of familiar names here and new names here. So just a reminder, please subscribe on YouTube. Let's see, let's click the right button. Please subscribe on YouTube. I would really love if you guys support what I'm doing by subscribing and ring that bell so you know when I'm live or I've uploaded a new video. And of course, you can join the Slack workspace, totally free, not very active right now, but a great place to get my attention and other people's attention if you have a thought or a question. Nikesh says, super informative session. Would love to hear thoughts on design documentation. Yeah, I'll have to write that down as a future possible podcast, design documentation. That is a good one. Whew! So, sorry again that we ran late, but this was a really big one. I know that people are on fire about this stuff. I get asked this all the time, and I thought if I could put it into a podcast, next time somebody goes, what about product designer? I can go, please check episode 52. What should titles be? Thank you. Go to the podcast. So thanks again to everybody who joined in. This was a great session with lots of live activity. I love that. And that's it for this week. I think I'm not doing any more podcasts this week. I had originally said that I was going to start doing fewer in July, and wouldn't you know it, I've scheduled more in July. So looks like I'm going to keep seeing you guys 3 times a week for the foreseeable future. So thanks again to everybody, and now I'm going to play us out of here because I've got a coaching client in about 12 minutes. Everybody have a great day, and I hope everybody is safe and healthy. And Maggie says, woo, great podcast. Thank you, Maggie. Always happy when you join. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.